So thank you for the kind introduction. It's nice to be warmly received when I walk into a room. The truth is I'm not used to that. I'm coming to you from the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, and when I walk in there, I usually get a very different kind of reception. If looks could kill, I'd probably be dead 1,000 times. So it's a bit of an adjustment to get a warm reception here tonight in Amsterdam, but I'm willing to make the adjustment. I understand several days ago that the event was sold out, and people were calling to try to get spaces, but the room could only hold so many people. It's a shame that there was no existing hall somewhere closer to where the community lives that might have had a larger space that maybe could have given room to more people, but I guess it doesn't exist. So what can you do? Tonight I want to share a few words about the situation at the United Nations. Share with you where I think we're at in terms of the struggle for equal treatment of Israel at the United Nations. All we ask is that Israel be accorded the rights that every nation is guaranteed in the United Nations Charter, which speaks of equal treatment to all nations, large and small. No one asks for special treatment. Every country should be scrutinized at the United Nations. All that one asks is that Israel be treated equally under the law, equally before the law. And if we see at major UN bodies, sadly, this guarantee of the United Nations Charter, equal treatment to all nations, large and small, is systematically violated. Again, Israel should be held to account. It's a rigorous democracy because it has, like you do here in the Netherlands, institutions of democracy, an independent judiciary, a vigorous, you could say a hyper-vigorous parliament, certainly a vigorous press, vigorous institutions of civil society, as we saw last year, non-stop demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people every Saturday night challenging the government. So Israel is a healthier place because it is challenged, because there is the disinfectant of sunlight. So the United Nations should be doing its job by holding countries to account, but doing so in a fair way that's meant to be constructive, not in a way that is meant to single out one nation, one people, one state for demonization. And sadly, if we look at what happens at the United Nations, that's what we see. You know, recently we marked in December the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is one of the great documents of the post-war era, December 10th, 1948, in Paris at the Palais de Chaillot, special meeting of the United Nations General Assembly. They adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, establishing for the first time an international discourse, the notion that every human being has the right to life, the right to liberty, to be free from arbitrary detention, free from torture, freedom of religion, and so on and so forth. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And those concepts were not obvious. They were created 3 years after World War II, and in the preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is stated, this document is in response to barbarous acts which outraged the conscience of mankind. Barbarous acts which outraged the conscience of mankind. And so they came together. Eleanor Roosevelt was the founding chair of the Human Rights Commission in 1946. René Cassin was the vice chair, the French legal philosopher. They had Charles Malik of Lebanon, P.C. Chang from China, and they came together and they reaffirmed the principles of human dignity. We today, in our time, when we witness barbarous acts, we have the right to expect that the United Nations and its institutions of human rights and its highest officials will act in a manner, will respond in a manner to show the outrage of the conscience of humankind. And indeed, on the 7th of October, when we witnessed barbarous acts, mass murder by Hamas, who broke a ceasefire that was in place for 2 years. People talk, ceasefire, ceasefire. We had a ceasefire for 2 years. On October 6th, there was a ceasefire. I was in Israel. On Friday, October 6th, there was a ceasefire. I was celebrating Simchat Torah, one of the joyous days of the Jewish calendar, celebrate the giving of the Torah. And on Saturday morning, Shabbat morning, at around 8 a.m. in Jerusalem, suddenly bomb alerts had to run to the bomb shelter, and Israel was under attack. The ceasefire was breached. Hamas sent thousands of terrorists. They invaded. They went deliberately into civilian communities. They committed mass murder, rape, mutilation, torture, some of the most sadistic acts that one can imagine, and that ones that one could not even imagine and would rather not know about. These were barbarous acts, and President Biden only days later said, sometimes in life there is pure, unadulterated evil is unleashed in the world. That's what President Biden said. And the Prime Minister of Britain, Rishi Sunak, spoke about the pogrom of October 7th. And perhaps that was one of the intentions of Hamas, was to commit a pogrom within Israel, to tell the Israelis, you thought you now have a sovereign state, you can defend yourself, we will show you, we will bring you back 100 years, 120 years back to Odessa and to the worst pogroms of Europe. We're going to bring you back to that. So you are not safe, and you are not a sovereign state, and we're going to massacre you. So these were barbarous acts. We would expect, like the response of President Biden, like the response of Prime Minister Sunak and many other world leaders who went to visit Israel to show their solidarity, the United Nations, which embodies the values of international peace, security, and universal human rights, would react in a similar way. They would reflect the conscience of humankind. But what we saw is something completely different, and I'll share with you a few examples. We saw, first of all, the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, who at certain points did condemn the actions of Hamas, but there was always a caveat. Yes, I condemn Hamas, but, he said, but these acts did not happen in a vacuum. And then Secretary General Guterres, speaking to the United Nations a couple of months ago, went on to enumerate numerous grievances of the Palestinians against Israel, effectively justifying one grievance after another, effectively justifying the barbarous acts of Hamas. And the next day, when Israel was rightly outraged, Israelis and others, he said, no, but I condemned Hamas. He was right, he did. But then right afterwards, he justified. He said, I didn't justify, but he did justify. He said, I condemn, but, he said, the actions didn't happen in a vacuum. Of course, he's right. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Nobody lives in a vacuum. Everything is motivated. Everything is caused by what we learned, and we all have influences. And if the Secretary General were truly to look at what influenced the terrorists of Hamas, what schools did they go to? What schools do people in Gaza go to? The vast majority of them are going to United Nations schools, UNRWA schools, and we'll come to that in a moment. But right now I'm just talking about the Secretary General. It didn't happen in a vacuum. He justified the actions of Hamas, even that he claimed that he did not. That's the Secretary General. And sadly, time and again, even when, on occasion, he will say the right thing and he will mention the hostages, he always feels the need to balance that, so-called to balance that. God forbid he should have 1 ounce of moral clarity to condemn a murderous terrorist group representing a nihilistic cult that is destroying its own society, destroying its own people, telling its people to act as human shields. God forbid that the United Nations, that he would allow the United Nations to take a moral stand. No, he always feels he has to condemn the terrorist group and then condemn many more times with much harsher language a democracy, imperfect, but a liberal democracy trying to defend its citizens from a terrorist group. So that is the Secretary General, a great disappointment. And then United Nations, you know, there's an agency that they created a number of years ago, a little over 10, 15 years ago. They combined all the different UN agencies dealing with women's rights, and they created UN Women. UN Women is the agency based in New York. It has tens of millions of dollars of budget. One of its sponsors is Sweden, and it's supposed to fight for the empowerment of women and gender equality. You would think that after women were targeted as a weapon of war by sexual assault, rape by Hamas, you would expect that UN Women would say something. In fact, if you looked at their statements, their social media, they've been extremely active since the war, but for 2 months, they said virtually nothing about the organized, deliberate, sadistic sexual assault by Hamas. UN Women happens to be headed by a Jordanian diplomat. But, you know, I wouldn't point the finger only to the Arab diplomat who heads it, because you can look at the white European American who heads their division. I think she's the vice chair of their division on international peace and security. Her name is Sarah Douglas. You know, she spoke in December to the United Nations in New York, and she spoke from home. And when you speak from home, you speak from Zoom. She was speaking to the United Nations. She was speaking from home. And you always know what's behind you. You take a look. You don't want your dirty laundry behind you, your dirty dishes. You know, you look what's behind you. And what was behind her was a big poster saying Palestine with the Palestinian flag. So she's speaking to the United Nations, giving a briefing on women's issues, not Palestine, and behind her in her home is a giant Palestine flag poster. She knew it was there. She's taken an oath to be neutral. It's an oath that you take. It's a solemn oath, and she violated that oath. Now, I wasn't there, I'm based in Geneva, but somebody was at the meeting and sent me the photo. They said, Hillel, this might be interesting to you. So I said, yes, it is. I'm going to post this on my Twitter account. Before I posted it, I said, wait a minute, who is Sarah Douglas? I saw what she did, but who is Sarah Douglas? I took a moment, and I know a little bit about Twitter, and I went on her Twitter account, and I saw some interesting things. And Twitter is a bit different than the other accounts. You know, on Facebook or Instagram, if you go to a public page, let's say on Instagram, to the best of my knowledge, you can't tell. If you go on the account of some famous Kim Kardashian and you want to know what she liked on her Instagram account, I don't think you can see that. But on Twitter, you can see. The person that has their phone and they're taking the metro and they're walking around and they're just clicking like. They're not posting anything, they're just liking things. On Twitter, that stays. Okay? So people who are a bit cautious on their own tweets, they might not post something, but they don't always know that when they click like, it's not just that they liked it, but you told the world that you liked it. So I saw her tweets, and there were a number of tweets that were problematic. Then I went and looked at her likes, and I saw that in the months of October, November, and December, she liked no less than 153 anti-Israel tweets. Okay, this is the Deputy Chief of International Peace and Security of UN Women, Sarah Douglas, and she liked tweets, political tweets by AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. These are the squad in America, radical left-wing, anti-Israel politicians. She liked tweets by groups called If Not Now, the Jewish Voices for Peace, which may have 3 Jews, and the rest are all non-Jewish, but it's to give a cover. There are other groups like that, I understand, in other countries. And these organizations were shutting down bridges, shutting down streets to accuse Israel of genocide after Israel suffered 1,200 slaughtered, thousands injured, raped, and Israel is being accused of genocide, trying to defend its citizens. So the most radical tweets by politicians and radical groups, she is liking one after another. Sarah Douglas particularly enjoyed liking the tweets by the self-hating Jewish groups trying to shut down bridges and streets. She seemed to particularly enjoy that. 153 tweets. She didn't like one tweet that condemned Hamas, not one tweet that defended Israel's right to defend itself. So we put this together and we put it out, and several senators, United States senators, Rick Scott from Florida, Marshall Blackburn spoke out, a couple of others, and the United Nations came under pressure. Their spokesman admitted, very rare, he said, yes, Sarah Douglas violated the code of conduct, which was a very rare admission. That was important. And of course, he said, the UN women said, we're looking into it. This happened around Christmas time. Now we're in March. I haven't heard anything since. So it's time to revisit our friends at UN Women and find out what's happening with Sarah Douglas. So as you might imagine, sadly, UN Women has been a failure. Other entities that are supposed to deal with women's rights, the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, her name is Reem Al-Salem. She's also Jordanian, Palestinian. She hates Israel and has been of absolutely zero use to condemn Hamas. On the contrary, she found ways to condemn Israel for violating women's rights. There was one exception that I should mention. A few days ago, the UN Secretary General's Special Representative on Violence Against Women in Conflict, if I'm getting the title right, I think her name is Priya Patten. She went to Israel, and she is exceptional in that she's a UN expert who is fair, and she indeed did acknowledge the crimes of Hamas and did find evidence and did report to the UN, and that was important. That was several days ago. I believe your foreign minister was in Israel recently and endorsed those initial findings. That was important. On Friday, the United States, the UK, and Germany, I believe, requested a meeting of the Security Council to debate these findings from the first time that a UN figure did acknowledge what Hamas did against women, but the Security Council is not expected to do anything, especially with China and Russia having the veto. So, with maybe one exception, most of the UN women officials and agencies have been a failure. I'll mention one other agency before coming to UNRWA, which has been a major battle that I want to talk about. So the final one I'll mention before UNRWA is the United Nations Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council is based in Geneva, where I am. I've been there now for 20 years this month. It's a really fun place. The members are some of the most murderous dictatorships you will ever find. China has 1 million Muslims in concentration camps. China is always a member of the Human Rights Council. Cuba is a police state. They grab young human rights activists and throw them in prison. They have about 1,000 political prisoners now because they called for freedom a couple of years ago in the summer. And they killed the dissident Oswaldo Paya. We're bringing his daughter to testify in 2 weeks at the United Nations. Cuba is always a member of the Human Rights Council. Pakistan is usually a member of the Human Rights Council. Qatar is a usual member of the Human Rights Council. 60%, no less than 60% of the members of the highest UN human rights body, the UN Human Rights Council, 47 members that serve for a 3-year term, come on, come off, 60% of the members are either full-on murderous dictatorships or some other form of authoritarian regime. So if you're making soup and you start with rotten ingredients, don't expect to get a healthy and delicious soup. You're going to get a rotten soup. So that's the UN Human Rights Council. Not surprisingly, most of the world's worst regimes get a free pass. We're now in the middle of a session. I'll be flying back to Geneva in a few days to speak, and we're in a session for 6 weeks. Most of the world's worst regimes will get a free pass. There will be 0 resolutions on Pakistan where women's rights are trampled. Freedom of religion doesn't exist. If you're a Christian woman, they'll accuse you of blasphemy, put you on death row. They can throw acid on your face. They sponsor a variety of terrorist groups, including the Taliban. There will be 0 resolutions on Pakistan. There will be 0 resolutions on China. 1.5 billion people, 1/5 of the world's population, whether it's the Uyghurs that I mentioned, the Uyghur Muslims who are facing some kind of ethnic cleansing, whether it's Hong Kong, a great beacon of democracy, extinguished through their draconian national security laws, and we're helping many exiles from Hong Kong. We hold the annual Geneva Summit for Human Rights, and every year we bring some of the leading voices from Hong Kong and other democracies. They've also crushed human rights lawyers. My friend Yang Jianli sat for 5 years in prison because he witnessed Tiananmen Square and he spoke out, and thankfully he managed to get out. But China, 1/5 of the world's population, denied any form of basic human rights. When Dr. Wen Liang tried to sound the alarm on the coronavirus in Wuhan, they summoned him in the middle of the night and they crushed him and told him that he wasn't able to speak out. So China gets a free pass. There'll be 0 resolutions on China. There'll be 0 resolutions on Saudi Arabia, 0 on Egypt, 0 on Lebanon, 0 on Zimbabwe. Last year we brought one of the leading dissidents from Zimbabwe, a country that systematically tramples democracy. Most of the world's worst regimes, the dictatorship of Erdogan in Turkey, 0 resolutions, you get a free pass. When it comes to Israel, Israel's a special case. There are more resolutions adopted on Israel at the Human Rights Council than on Syria, Iran, and North Korea combined. Okay? There are more resolutions adopted on Israel than any other country in the world. And you may think Israel's bad. We can have a dispute about that, but to think that there should be more attention, more resolutions adopted on a country of less than 10 million population than on China, than on Syria, than in Iran, North Korea put together, I don't think any credible person could make that argument. That is, I used to be a lawyer in New York, and if you want to make a case for a pattern and practice of discrimination, you have that case at the Human Rights Council. We talked about the resolutions. Before you even begin the resolutions, there's the agenda. As we meet for the next 6 weeks, we follow an agenda. 10 points on the agenda. Okay, 10 points on the agenda. Item 2 is the report of the High Commissioner. Item 3 will be on Friday, civil and political rights. Sounds good. Item 4, human rights situations around the world that require our attention. Human rights situations around the world. Item 4, if you want to bring up in a speech Syria, North Korea, Iran, you could under item 4. And then a few days later, we get to item 7, human rights violations in Palestine and other occupied Arab territories. An agenda item only on Israel. No other country in the world, not China with 1.5 billion people, not Russia, which is destroying thousands and thousands of Ukrainians and has crushed the country, not Sudan, where there's 20 million people in desperate need of humanitarian aid, 8 million IDPs in the past year alone, not Syria, which barrel bombs its own people in their homes, hospitals, and schools. None of these countries has its own agenda item. If you want to raise it at all, you do so in the general item 4. Only Israel has a special agenda item. Every single meeting, we meet in September, March, and June. There's the day on the world and the day on Israel. No other country in the world gets that special treatment. I call it Hate Israel Day, where sometimes the moral indifference that is shown throughout the year when all of these ambassadors fail to act against outrages that are happening daily, Christians being killed in Nigeria, no one gives a damn, no one does a thing for them. And they know their guilty conscience, they do nothing. Suddenly the Israelis say, we're springing to action. Did you see what we did? We had an emergency session on Israel. The council acted. And then the ambassadors shake each other's hand. Bravo, well done. We took action. We took action. What happens under the Hate Israel Day when that rusty mechanism suddenly springs to life and condemns Israel? They call emergency sessions. Whenever there's a war against Hamas, an emergency session to condemn Israel. They create commissions of inquiry. I'll give you an example. The most famous one for people here who are maybe above 30 may remember that in the year 2009, there was a war between Israel and Hamas. In Hebrew, Oferet Yitzukah, Operation Cast Lead. This was Israel after many years of Hamas rockets. Israel finally took action. There was a war in December 2008, January 2009. I believe it was January 12th, 2009. The Human Rights Council held an emergency session to condemn Israel. First they condemned Israel, then they said, let's investigate. First condemn, then we'll investigate. First the verdict, then the facts. Sort of Alice in Wonderland, George Orwell all put together. So they created a commission of inquiry. It took them 3 months to find someone. They couldn't find, they tried to find various people that said, the Human Rights Council, I don't know, not sure if I want to work for you. But they found someone. They found Judge Goldstone. He was Jewish. He agreed to take it on. He thought he would achieve something. And it was the infamous Goldstone report. He didn't write it, by the way. It was written in part by a Dutch person. So you can, for those of you who don't know, her name is Grietje Bars, if I'm pronouncing it right. No Anglo can pronounce Grietje. But did I say it right, Grietje? All right, I'm getting a point. I get a Dutch point tonight. Grietje Bars is a Dutch lawyer, scholar living in London. She is Marxist. She is not for animal rights, but animal liberation. They're the ones who throw bombs at things for animals. She was the spokeswoman for the flotilla campaign. You remember the Mavi Marmara, when a radical Turkish terrorist group called the IHH organized a so-called humanitarian flotilla of boats to enter the Gaza naval space and break the blockade, and Israel disarmed several of the ships. And this one ship, they had iron bars and they came to kill soldiers, and about 9 of these IHH people were killed. Grietje Bars was the spokeswoman in 2010 for the European Coalition for the Flotilla movement. She wrote chapters of the Goldstone report. Not everyone knows this. Judge Goldstone, flew in from wherever he did, and there were 4 members of his inquiry. The commissioners at the UN, they don't write the report. It's written by someone who's sitting around the block from me in Geneva on Giuseppe Motta Street, who's a professional who sits there and goes through various NGO reports, does a copy-paste job. There's groups called Diaconia, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch. They do copy-paste, and they put it in. They say, we received all these reports, and Amnesty said Israel killed innocent civilians for no reason. They asked the people in Gaza, was there any terrorist action here? And everyone said, no, there was nothing. There was, and these were very sincere, credible people, and in Gaza, and they said there was nothing happening here. Israel just randomly bombed our house, and so these are the reports by Amnesty, Human Rights Watch. Grietje Bars took them all together, and she wrote chapters of the Goldstone report. It came out in September 2009. You may remember it said that Israel deliberately tried to murder civilians, Israeli leaders, military and political. It was used, the Goldstone report was used to try to criminalize Israeli leaders. They went in London to the prosecutors, tried to indict Tzipi Livni, who's actually like one of the leaders of the peace camp. They tried to indict her using the Goldstone report as Annex A of their legal petition. They also tried to indict Doron Almog when he landed in London. Famous story, the plane landed, and I think it was an El Al plane, and he was told, you may not want to get off the plane in London because some British officers are coming to arrest you because of a legal petition. Annex A was the Goldstone report. So these are the examples of the Human Rights Council, Agenda Item 7 against Israel, creating commissions of inquiry designed to demonize and criminalize Israel. The mobs that you're seeing in the streets today in 2024, and that we saw in the past 6 months, and you saw yesterday at the opening of a Holocaust museum. This is the country, I'm told, that has the highest proportion in the Western Hemisphere of Jews who were killed, who were sent to Auschwitz in the Western Hemisphere. So what you suffered here in Amsterdam and the Netherlands was a terrible version of the Holocaust. And yesterday you had the opening of a Holocaust museum, and people had the shame, whatever their objections are to Israel, fine. One day of the year, one evening, one afternoon, you couldn't hold back and not protest in front of the opening of a Holocaust museum where survivors were there, where a little kid, a granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor was there, and they were shoving pictures in her face. It was disgusting. These mobs have been empowered. They've been empowered by institutions like the UN Human Rights Council and their commissions of inquiry, like Amnesty International, which was also active yesterday in telling President Herzog that he belongs in The Hague and in the dock of the criminal court, and so on and so forth. So shame on the UN and shame on institutions that were founded to defend human rights and have become apologists for terrorists. Apologists for terrorists. I'll just mention a word. I'm talking about the UN, but since I mentioned Amnesty, I also have to mention Human Rights Watch, an organization whose founder was a friend of mine, Bob Bernstein, publisher of Random House, someone who began to publish the dissidents in the 1970s and 80s like Sharansky and Sakharov And he created Human Rights Watch, and then tragically, it was taken over by someone named who hates Israel pathologically, who wakes up in the morning every day thinking, how can I demonize the Jewish state? Of course, he's Jewish. And I'm not a psychiatrist. You would need a team in Vienna. You would need a team in Vienna to look at him, observe him. This is a reference to Seinfeld. They told George, on Seinfeld, you don't need one. You need a whole team in Vienna observing you 24 hours a day. Ken Roth needs a team to observe and try to figure out how pathologically messed up he is. He wakes up in the morning and says, how can I turn the knife against the Jewish state? Even when he would condemn Hamas in a tweet, now in a tweet you get 3 sentences. In the old days you had 1 sentence. In 1 sentence, he couldn't condemn Hamas without saying, I condemn Hamas like I condemn Israel for building illegal settlements that are war crimes and da-da-da-da. So that's Ken Roth. He ruined Human Rights Watch. And if I have a moment at the end, I'll mention some people who've spoken out since then. That's the Human Rights Council. 2 other things about the council, and then I'll come to UNRWA. I've mentioned to you the Goldstone Report. The Goldstone Report did a terrible amount of damage. Erdogan from Turkey, he showed up in France, and he said, he said, Goldstone is a Jew and his report is clear. Goldstone is a Jew and his report is clear. That it went all around the world that Israel should be indicted in courts, in criminal courts at the ICC here in The Hague and other courts. And Goldstone himself, to his credit, disowned the report. A year and a half later, he wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post. That was a very important op-ed. He said, had I known today what I knew then, I wouldn't have adopted this report. And he said important things. He also wrote an article in the New York Times saying that Israel is not an apartheid state. And so he did his form of repentance, but the damage of the report is still there. Today, the report lasted for about 6 months. There was the report, there was some follow-up, and it was over. The damage was still done, but it was over. 2 years ago, they created a new kind of commission of inquiry. Okay? The new kind of commission of inquiry doesn't last for 6 months, doesn't last for a year. It lasts for perpetuity. It lasts forever. There is no end date. There was a war between Israel and Hamas 2 years ago in May 2021, so now it's almost 3 years ago. And after the war, emergency session, condemned Israel, created a commission of inquiry, but no end date. It goes on forever. And not only to investigate that war, okay, the Goldstone Report was to investigate one war of December 2008, January 2009. This Goldstone Report was to investigate the war of May 2021 and everything leading up to it, everything leading up to it. That means the past 50 years, 100 years, 4,000 years, 10 million years, all the history, and to look at systematic racism, okay, which obviously meaning to accuse Israel of apartheid, and to look at racism and I'm forgetting the other piece, and war crimes, basically. Who did they pick to head their commission? Now, there are thousands of people you can pick to head a commission of inquiry. Thousands of law professors. Thousands of law professors, diplomats, former UN experts. The choices you have to name for a commission of inquiry are endless. You could also name Amal Clooney, the wife of George Clooney. She was named in the summer of 2014, and when she was engaged to George Clooney to one of these commissions of inquiry. It was a huge story. She was engaged, she was about to get married. I think it was in Venice, I think the wedding was. And right before she was named to this inquiry, and then she said, no, I'm not on it. They named me, but I'm not on it. So you could even name Amal Clooney. But who did they pick? They picked a woman named Navi Pillay. Who is Navi Pillay? Navi Pillay is a judge. She has on her CV good credentials. She was a judge in South Africa. She was anti-apartheid in South Africa. She's in her 80s. She's the generation of the African National Congress. She was the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. So on her CV, she has a very good CV. The problem is that Navi Pillay has a record of systematically attacking Israel. When she was High Commissioner, when there was the flotilla, I was there at the UN. I will never forget it. It was May 31st, 2010. Before anyone even knew what happened with this flotilla. Again, IHH terrorists had iron bars coming to kill Israeli soldiers who initially did not shoot. They did not shoot initially. They had to shoot to defend their lives. Navi Pillay condemned Israel right away, didn't wait to see anything. She said Israel once again, Israel shows utter disregard for international law. This was her comportment for about 6 years as UN High Commissioner, always attacking Israel. 2 years before she was named to this inquiry, so she's named in July 2021 she was named. 2 years before, she signed a petition. The title was Sanction Israeli Apartheid. Okay? Sanction Israeli Apartheid. She wrote to governments with others saying Israel commits apartheid. You governments need to sanction Israel. Now she's the head of an inquiry, objective, independent, impartial, non-selective, whether there's racism in Israel. She just signed a petition, sanction Israel for apartheid. I used to be a lawyer in New York. Can you imagine if I went before the judge and the judge was someone who 2 years before said that my client, Mr. Jones, is the worst racist person in the world. The whole world needs to sanction him. You'd request the judge to step down, to recuse herself or himself. And if she wouldn't, you'd make an appeal and the judge would be disqualified. Navi Pillay, not just 2 years ago, a month before, she was named in July 2021. In June 2021, she wrote a letter to President Biden saying, the war of May 2021, Israel's guilty. Blame Israel. That's the other piece of her mandate, is to examine the war. She already said Israel's guilty. She's lobbying governments to... She's the head of the inquiry. You couldn't make this stuff up. We put her quotes together. There were a lot of them. We did a 25-page petition. I used to be a lawyer. I kind of miss it. Put a 25-page legal request to the UN Human Rights Council, to Navi Pillay, saying you must recuse yourself, citing the UN's own rules. The UN actually, because of previous cases like this, said, okay, maybe we'll make rules. You know, if you made prior pronouncements that are partisan, if you said things against the person you're supposed to investigate, you should be disqualified. Those are their rules of the UN Human Rights Office. We cited them. We cited all the rules of international courts. Very basic common sense rule of law. You're the head of the inquiry. You're the head judge. Maybe you shouldn't be someone who publicly has said this person's the most guilty person in the most guilty country in the world. So she didn't respond. I went up to her a few months later. I said, I gave it to her in her hand. I said, Madam Pillay, I don't know if you received this. Oh, yeah, I saw it. I said, well, you didn't reply. I said, well, we can't reply to everything. Can't reply to everything. Yeah, it was reported in the newspapers. She couldn't reply to everything. So that's their attitude. They have contempt for just asking the basic rule of law, complete contempt. That was Navi Pillay. The other members of the inquiry include Chris Sidoti, used to work in my building. He's Australian. He says, Jews throw around accusations of anti-Semitism like rice at a wedding. Jews throw around accusations of anti-Semitism like rice at a wedding. That's Chris Sidoti from Australia. And then there's Milun Kotari from India. I heard about him because 20 years ago, he was the UN expert on housing, and he wanted to visit Israel, and Israel said, he said, I'm coming just as a personal visit, not a UN visit, personal visit. I said, fine, you can come. He came back to Geneva, and he said, I want to issue a UN report condemning Israel for violations of housing. They said, but you said it was a personal visit. Changed my mind. So that's Milun Kotari, and shortly after he was appointed, about a year later, he gave an interview for an anti-Israel website called Mondoweiss. It's one of the leading anti-Israel websites in America. He gave an interview for an hour, and he said, I love this job. I'm a member of the Permanent Commission of Inquiry. There's no end to it. The other inquiries end after 6 months, so they do some work, but then it ends. It never ends. We can really do some serious work, and we're going after Israel. We're meeting activists. We're going to parliaments. We went to The Hague. By the way, they went to The Hague to meet with the deputy prosecutor of the ICC. Before she was deputy prosecutor, a year before, she was the president of the Human Rights Council. She was the ambassador of Fiji, Najat Shamim Khan. And she's the one who appointed Navi Pillay. She appointed Milun Kotari. Okay, so she appointed these anti-Israel people. Then as a reward, she was named deputy prosecutor in The Hague of the ICC. And then she welcomed them to The Hague and said, please, give me the findings you have against Israel. She appointed them. If they ever bring an actual case against Israel, I can assure you the first thing the Israeli lawyers will say is, the whole thing is tainted because the deputy prosecutor appointed the investigators in the UN. So anyway, this is how corrupt things are at the Human Rights Council, and sadly, in parts of the ICC in The Hague. So Maloon Kothari gave an interview. He said, I love this job I have. I'm on this UN Commission of Inquiry. It's permanent. It's against Israel. We're really going to go after the occupation. By the way, the inquiry in name is supposed to also look at Palestinians. It's also supposed to look at Hamas. But he didn't mention it once. He didn't even go through the motions of pretending like he's investigating Fatah, pretending like he's investigating Islamic Jihad. He didn't even pretend. The whole, you can read it. We've transcribed it on our website, unwatch.org. You can read the whole interview. And he says, it's really wonderful what we have. He says, but the problem, he says, you know, the Jewish lobby controls social media. The Jewish lobby controls social media, and they're coming after us. It's really bad. You know, sometimes people say the quiet part out loud. That's the part you're supposed to think. You're supposed to say, I hate Zionists, I hate Israelis. That's fine, right? But you're not supposed to say the Jewish lobby controls social media, but that's what he said. He also said that we have to ask if Israel should be a member of the UN, right? This is a UN expert who has never asked whether the Chinese Communist Party, which is crushing 1.5 billion people, should be a member of the UN, or Vladimir Putin, who is crushing my friend Vladimir Kara-Murza, who's in prison in Siberia in solitary confinement because he dared to speak out in Moscow against the war in Ukraine. No one has ever asked, should Russia be a member of the Human Rights Council? Or a country like Egypt. Whether Egypt, I saw that your foreign minister went to Israel a few days ago, and she criticized Israel a lot. She went to Egypt. I read her tweets. I met with Egypt. We were talking about cooperation. Everything is wonderful. Do you know how many political prisoners are in Egypt? Tens of thousands of political prisoners. The Dutch foreign minister said a very lovely tweet about her meeting with the Egyptian foreign minister. I know him because he used to be the ambassador in Geneva. I won't go on, but he's an interesting guy, has interesting views. So, you know, these countries get a free pass. So Maloon Kothari has never asked about any other country in the world whether they deserve to be a member of the UN. He said, should Israel be a member of the UN? But when he said that Israel, that the Jewish lobby is controlling social media, he made a mistake. Luckily, many countries, including the Netherlands, to its credit, and you have an excellent special envoy fighting anti-Semitism, and the Netherlands condemned Maloon Kothari. France, Germany, the UK, America, Canada, Switzerland, Belgium, countries that never, ever, ever condemned a UN expert, they all condemned Maloon Kothari. So it was a rare moment when this hater, supposedly a human rights expert, was condemned. Finally, about the Human Rights Council, there is a special expert on Palestine. You know, they have about 15 special rapporteurs. It means an investigator on individual countries. There's a special rapporteur on North Korea. There's one on Sudan. There's one on, there's now one on Russia, quite new. There's about 15 of them. And there's one on Palestine, okay? Whether you think of all the places in the world, the top 13, 15, there should be one on Palestine, I don't know. But if there's going to be an expert on human rights in Palestine, let him or her speak about what Israel is doing, what Hamas is doing, the jihad, speak about human rights in the Palestinian territories. Of course, that's not what the mandate says. The mandate was created in February 1993, and even though the title is Special Rapporteur, sounds good, for human rights, okay, in the Palestinian territories, okay, everyone deserves human rights in the Palestinian territories, but if you read the mandate is the Special Rapporteur is mandated to investigate Israel's violations in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. Israel's violations of the bases and principles of international law. Only Israel. So if Hamas commits a terrorist attack, rapporteur will say, not in my mandate. The jihad, Fatah, not in my mandate. If Israel goes to arrest the terrorists, condemn Israel. Who's the special rapporteur? They have quite interesting people they pick. It used to be Richard Falk. Richard Falk is so pro-Hamas that even the PLO secretly tried to get him fired because he was supporting Hamas. And I read out a WikiLeaks. You know, America about 10, 15 years ago, there were leaked diplomatic cables from the US State Department to its embassies and back, and I read them to see what's going on in Geneva. And I read a thing where the diplomat in Geneva in America said, I met the Palestinian ambassador and the deputy ambassador, and he's quite upset. Richard Falk, the rapporteur in Palestine, they nominated him, but now he likes Hamas so much, and the Fatah, PLO hates Hamas. They want to get him fired. But I, the American, I said, well, you can't fire a rapporteur. It's not nice. I read that out, that cable, and the PLO guy was very upset. He tried to stop me from speaking because I just exposed what he had said. So that's Richard Falk. He also believes that 9/11 is a conspiracy theory. It wasn't bin Laden and the hijackers of Al-Qaeda, but America that did it itself. He supports the conspiracy theory. He was the rapporteur for about 6 years. Today's rapporteur on Palestine in Geneva, she's going to be coming in 2 weeks, I'll be there, is Francesca Albanese. Some of you activists here, I see this is an educated crowd, you've heard of Francesca Albanese, probably one of the most anti-Israel, anti-Semitic UN experts we've had in years, and that's saying a lot. You will know that just 2 weeks ago, when French President Macron said that the massacre of October 7th was the worst anti-Semitic violence we've seen since the Holocaust, you will know that Francesca Albanese commented, and she wrote on Twitter, anti-Semitic? No, October 7th was not anti-Semitic. It was a response to Israeli oppression. Okay, and she made a mistake. She took on France. Normally France says nothing. When she was appointed 2 years ago, I went to the UN and I told them who she was, and they couldn't care less. France said nothing, no country said anything. But now she attacked France, their honor was injured, and they hit back and they said a UN expert to support anti-Semitism is awful, and she was condemned by France. Germany entered the fray. They said, we stand fully behind France. What she said was horrible, so she got condemned, and then the US government entered and condemned her as well. Thankfully, should have happened earlier, but France, Germany, and the US condemned her. A few days ago, what was the latest? A few days ago, she said that Israeli women should be haunted forever, especially the soldiers of the women because of what they're doing. Horrible things. And again, 2 years ago when she was appointed, we went to the Human Rights Council. We gave them the dossier. We said, that she routinely compares Israelis to Nazis. She says that the Nakba, the Palestinian experience, the suffering of 1948, is equivalent to the Holocaust. That means Israelis are Nazis. She routinely accuses Israel, this is years ago, of genocide when she gave an interview shortly before being appointed. She said in Italian, she said how wonderful it was that these groups like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch had condemned Israel for apartheid. She said, it's so amazing, and I'm going to get my Italian wrong, but I'll try. She looked up and she said, hanno liberato la parola. They liberated the word. They liberated the word. So she was so happy that she's going to be a UN expert. She can condemn Israel of apartheid because Amnesty and Human Rights Watch did it first. You want to say that the Jewish state is evil, and everyone, Jews and others who are here tonight with us, who support Israel are evil. You say whatever works today, and in our time, you say words like apartheid, genocide, and that's what she was trying to do. So she had a long record. We sent it to the UN. They couldn't care less. That's why she was appointed. That's why the Palestinians wanted her. So that is Francesca Albanese. I'll just say that 10 years ago, she used to work for UNRWA. She was a lawyer for UNRWA before this. That was a part of her CV. And at some point, she was fundraising for UNRWA on her Facebook page. I don't know if she was still working for them, but she was fundraising on her Facebook page. And she was saying, you got to support UNRWA. She said, but America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. A UN human rights expert. How disgusting. Can you imagine someone who said something so racist against black people, something hateful against gays, or any other minority group would be allowed to be a UN human rights expert? And she uses these anti-Semitic tropes. America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. Europe, she says, is subjugated by Holocaust guilt. And she is the rapporteur. We also, she also about a year and a half ago spoke at a Hamas conference and said, you have the right to resist. This is Francesca Albanese. Finally, I come to UNRWA, and I'll wrap up with the UN and then give a sense of where we're going from here. So, and then take questions if we have. So, a word or two about UNRWA. For those who don't know, UNRWA is the UN agency for Palestinian so-called refugees. This is the war of 1948. You will recall on November 29th, 1947, the UN General Assembly voted to create two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state in Palestine to partition the land. The Jews danced in the streets. They named a street after that decision in Katamon in Jerusalem, Kaf Tet b'November, November 29th. There's also a street in Tel Aviv. The Jews celebrated the two-state solution. They danced in the streets to have a Jewish state. It didn't include their ancestral lands from the Bible. It didn't include Jerusalem, didn't include Hebron, didn't include Joseph's tomb in Shechem and many other biblical places, but they said, we have sovereignty, we'll take it. The Arabs went to war. The Arabs refused to allow any Jewish state anywhere. They went to war. They lost the war. There were refugees, hundreds of thousands of refugees, and the American government and some others created UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, to help them, to help refugees, Arab refugees who fled to Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, the West Bank, Gaza. And they tried to rehabilitate them. And the Arabs said, no, we will not let you rehabilitate us and build us homes in these other places because we refuse to admit that the war is over. The war is not over. We refuse to accept the Jewish state. We're continuing the war. We're going to go back to our homes and we're continuing the war. And when some Arabs tried to build like agricultural settlements, they burned it all down. You could read the book called The War of Return by Dr. Einat Wilf and Adi Schwartz. You will find amazing stories there. Those who tried to rehabilitate the refugees, they were attacked, physically attacked and burned down. So neither the Arab states nor the refugees themselves allowed the US government or anyone else to rehabilitate them. America wanted to give up on UNRWA. It's not working. They refused to be rehabilitated. The Arab states said, no, you have to pay for UNRWA. If you want our oil, and if you don't want us to join the Soviet Union, you created Israel, you voted for it, you made the problem, you have to pay for it. And since the 1950s, our countries, the Netherlands, Canada where I grew up, Switzerland where I live, the United States, all the Western countries, we pay for UNRWA. And UNRWA is pathological. Let me explain what I mean. An agency that was created with positive, benign, philanthropic, altruistic motives to help refugees has become something pathological. Next to my office in Geneva is the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. If you're a refugee from Syria, from Sudan, from Ukraine, UNHCR will try to help you find a home in Canada, in Sweden, in Germany, or some neighboring country, right? You know, Syrians, millions of them are in Turkey. UNHCR. Try to let you move on, resettle with your life. That is UNHCR. Millions of people who were refugees to let you become a non-refugee. UNRWA is the opposite. UNRWA is the opposite. They refuse to resettle a single Palestinian refugee. The opposite. They perpetuate Palestinians as refugees. Don't move on. You have the right of return. You're going to go home to your homes in Jaffa and Haifa and Akka. You're going home. What does the right of return mean? Is it some lovely thing? You go to The Hague, my right of return. We know today what the right of return means. It's October 7th. That is the right of return. That is what the Palestinian dream is. To go back to what they think is their homes. They were told for 75 years in UNRWA schools in Gaza. You could watch the videos. Your home is not here. They asked the kids. You see the video, 5-year-old kids. Is your home here in Gaza? La. Where's your home? Akka, Haifa. That's your home. And how do they get their home? By submitting a petition? No. Violent jihad. They teach violent jihad in that society, and UNRWA celebrated it. And I know this because for the past 9 years, we did a small project where we went on the internet. I don't live in Gaza, neither do you, but you can go on Facebook, and you could type in UNRWA, and you see a teacher, and her name is Elham Mansour. She's an UNRWA teacher in Lebanon. And you see the pictures, and she's with her school in Lebanon, and you see her kids, and the students, and the blackboard, and you see she says, every Muslim is obliged to slaughter every Jew and Israeli, and if you don't do it, you're a bad Muslim. And she's writing it in public on Facebook. No settings, no privacy, public Facebook page. Elham Mansour and Riyad Nimr from Lebanon, who wrote a year or two ago, who said that the massacre of Jews in a synagogue in Jerusalem in 2014 is amazing, and I praise Hamas for massacring Jews. So encouraging, promoting terrorism. Do you think in any of these cases, we've been documenting this for 9 years. Go on our website, unwatch.org, 9 years of reports, every year 1 or 2 reports sent to the UN, sent to UNRWA. Do you think in any case, because the UN says there are a few bad apples. Every organization has some bad apples, right? Some bad apples. Do you think in one case of Riyad Nimr and Elham Mansour and 150 others that we documented, that there was one of their peers, one of their friends, one of their UNRWA colleagues, UNRWA teachers, UNRWA school principals said, Riyad Nimr, I'm shocked, you're such a bad apple. You're betraying UNRWA values, right? The UNRWA says, whenever we bring this, say, a terrorist? He betrayed the UNRWA values. That's against everything that UNRWA stands for. Really? Really? In every single case, either the UNRWA, their friends, liked it, wrote comments saying, Professor, you're great, we agree with you 100%. Not one instance ever did someone say, that we saw, did someone say, I'm shocked that you're saying praise Hamas, I'm shocked that you're praising Adolf Hitler. Numerous UNRWA employees praise Adolf Hitler. Not one case did someone say, I'm shocked, I object. This is not the way of our UNRWA society. The opposite. Riyad Nimr in Lebanon, we exposed how he celebrated terrorism. The whole teachers union in Lebanon went on strike. The whole UNRWA teachers union went on strike. You could see parades in Nahr al-Bared in their refugee camp. They took the kids out of school and they went on parades with guns and flags and said, Riyad Nimr is our patriotic hero. Because UNRWA suspended him for a few weeks because there was pressure from our report. American government once did some pressure. They suspended him. They didn't fire him. Suspended him. The whole teachers union went on strike. A few bad apples. The whole system embraced him. So this is UNRWA. Pathological. And if you ask me, it's a direct line from what they learned in UNRWA schools to what happened on October 7th, the right of return. Okay, we hear about two-state solution. The Netherlands believes in a two-state solution. Israel accepted a two-state solution in November 1947, and since then at Camp David and many other instances. If you believe in UNRWA, you don't believe in a two-state solution. You say the Palestinians get Gaza and West Bank, but in their schools they teach them, is your home here in Gaza? Nah, Gaza's for us, but Israel's for us. Kibbutz Be'eri is for us. They speak about settlers. They don't mean the settlers, the radical settlers with the peyot. They don't mean them in Kiryat Arba. They mean the secular people living in Kibbutz Be'eri within 1948 Israel. They are for them settlers, and that is their home that they want to uproot Israelis from. So that is the message of UNRWA. So we are told, and I'll just say a few more minutes, and then I'll stop and I'll wrap things up. In the past few months, things came to a head. What happened? On January 10th, we exposed the existence of a Telegram chat group, right? You all know about WhatsApp. You have chat groups. There's also Telegram. It's another app. For those of you who don't know, you can have a chat group. We discovered it was sent to us, and we explored and we discovered this group of 3,000 UNRWA teachers in a chat group talking about school. When is school coming up? What lessons are you teaching? When is the holidays? How are we getting paid? It was teachers on like a monthly contract. When are we getting paid? They would circulate the names, give us your bank account number. UNRWA teachers talking about UNRWA schools and teaching. But also they were chatting about things. And we went to October 7th. And guess what? On October 7th, they were full of praise. They were sharing photos. Look what's happening. It's amazing. Our heroes are attacking the murderous, the evil Israelis. Our heroes, our mujahideen, our holy warriors. They're sharing photos. They're sharing videos about the attacks on Israel. They're celebrating it. One says, who taught these jihadis? Where did they get this education? And the other one responds, they got it from their mother's milk. They were breastfed the jihad in their mother's milk. We, inshallah, should give the same education to our UNRWA students. This was being shared on the UNRWA chat group. We exposed it on January 10th. Then we put it in a report called the Terrorgram, and I appeared before Congress on January 30th to expose this report. It's not a few bad apples. 3,000 UNRWA teachers are in it. Again, not one person said, I'm shocked. These are UNRWA teachers, UNRWA administrators. Not one of them said, I'm shocked at what's happening. You're betraying the UNRWA values. Of course not. So a few days before we had the congressional hearing in Washington, it emerged that UNRWA staff actually took part in the massacre. At least a dozen, now we think maybe 42, possibly took part in some way in the massacre of October 7th. People who massacred, people who kidnapped. Last week there were recordings of 2 UNRWA employees boasting about a sex slave, a Jewish woman that they kidnapped from Israel, and they were boasting about who they abducted. So these are UNRWA workers. The information was given to the UN. Guterres And UNRWA said, okay, we're firing the 12 people. Some of them were dead already, but we're firing them. They no longer belong to UNRWA. Not our problem, okay? They don't belong to UNRWA anymore. We fired them. So that was a big story. America, as Elad mentioned, America announced they're suspending funds. Even though the Biden administration used to be very pro-UNRWA, they said we're suspending funds. And then over that weekend, January 27th, about 15 plus countries suspended funding. America, Canada, Netherlands, Great Britain, Germany, France, many countries announced suspension of funds totaling maybe $500 million. Most of the funds were sent already before. It wasn't like the funds suddenly, the spigot was closed and they didn't get money. In many cases, the money was just sent the week before. But the announcement was very powerful. The Western world was saying, this is crossing a line, we're suspending funds. Sadly, since then, we're seeing a backsliding. As Elad mentioned, in the past week, the European Commission announced they're funding UNRWA now. Canada announced, very embarrassed as a Canadian, they didn't even wait. They said, we got assurances. Nonsense. Sweden also announced. And I'll be tomorrow in The Hague to meet with members of parliament to talk about this. You know, the UN said, we're taking action, okay? We're taking action, they said. By the way, 9 years we sent them reports about their teachers and school principals encouraging terrorism. They attacked us. The spokesman, Chris Gunnis, in August 2015, the first time we raised the issue with them, he wrote on Twitter, journalists, don't listen to UN Watch. They're saying nonsense. Don't listen to them. It's he said, she said. It's all nonsense. Not true. Not true. That was their initial and systematic response, was to attack us. Any group that will expose incitement to terrorism and anti-Semitism, they will attack you. The notion that UNRWA takes these accusations very seriously, the opposite is true. The opposite is true. We know it for 9 years. But this time UNRWA had to pretend, so they said, we're doing two things. The UN announced in New York, OIOS, the Office of Independent Internal Oversight, is going to investigate the 12 terrorists. So number one, serious investigation. Is that a real investigation? Well, OIOS answers to Guterres. So they're not independent. They answer to Guterres. They will say something happened. It's shameful. It's a betrayal of UNRWA values. We fired them. Move on. Case closed. Next. Nothing to see here. Move on. That's OIOS. We know about them very well. And we had a summit 2 weeks ago in Geneva about UNRWA. And we had Edward Flaherty, one of the world experts on OIOS. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, OIOS is not independent. Do not expect an independent inquiry. So that's inquiry number one. Let's talk about inquiry number two. The UN said, we're so serious, we created an independent review group headed by Madame Catherine Colonna, the recently retired foreign minister of France. She is heading the independent review group into neutrality violations. That's when their teachers celebrate Hitler and celebrate terrorist attacks. The UN euphemisms, you know, like here in Europe, when you would kill Jews, you would say there's a deportation, there's a transport, there's a this, there's a that, euphemisms, right? So the UN is called neutrality violations. Neutrality violations. Maybe the UNRWA worker promoted massacre or mass slaughter. A neutrality violation. It happens. Madame Catherine Colonna is the head of it, and is she independent? Madame Catherine Colonna. Why did they pick Catherine Colonna? Well, I don't know, but I saw that on January 13th, that's like 2 months ago, she wrote on Twitter to the head of UNRWA, Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, great job, Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, great job. Votre travail jamais plus utile que maintenant. Your work has never been more necessary, more needed than now. You're doing amazing work. So 3 days after we exposed the terrorgram, she's praising UNRWA for their amazing work. Do you think she's independent and objective? By the way, France sits on the consultative commission, the advisory commission of UNRWA, meaning she's a board member. France is one of the founding board members of UNRWA, giving them money. Do you think she's going to say, for the past several years, we disregarded incitement to terrorism. UNRWA failed when she was on the board? No, absurd. So this review is not independent. They hired 3 Scandinavian institutes to help her, and each of them is equally biased against Israel. It's all a sham. And she said in New York, she said, I'm named for this independent group to reassure the donors, pour rassurer les donateurs. Her job is to reassure the donors, not to find systematic incitement of terrorism, hiring routinely teachers and school principals who incite to jihad and praise Adolf Hitler, her job is to reassure the donors. And the donors didn't even bother to wait. Canada said, we got assurances, we don't need to wait, the money's coming back. Okay, and I'm ashamed that the government of Canada, which once under Stephen Harper was very different, today under Justin Trudeau, has been a terrible disappointment in the past 6 months. Really shameful, really shameful. So that's UNRWA. I'll just say one or two other words, which is that, they always say UNRWA, we're going to put out a video. You're going to see the UNRWA spokesman saying UNRWA does life-saving work. And then Guterres says UNRWA does life-saving work. And then every ambassador in the world says UNRWA does life-saving work. And the head of Amnesty, all echoing the same lines. Okay, and it's a lie. It's a lie. And the other lie is UNRWA is irreplaceable. America said the Congress doesn't want to fund UNRWA anymore. Not just the Republicans, the Democrats as well don't want to fund UNRWA. Bipartisan legislation came out of the Senate. They do not want to fund UNRWA anymore. America said, the State Department said, we're looking for replacements. World Food Program, World Health Organization, NGOs, other groups can give out boxes of food. There's other entities around the world that are not UNRWA that feed hungry people, that deliver humanitarian aid. We want to give our millions of dollars to others. Guterres, the head of the UN, according to Devex, Colin Lynch, leading UN reporter, exclusively reported about 2 weeks ago that Guterres told all the agencies, you are prohibited from taking a penny from the US that's meant for UNRWA. World Food Program, don't you dare take a dime. So UNRWA's irreplaceable. Yeah, it's irreplaceable because you're threatening to break their legs if anyone replaces them. It's not because technically they're irreplaceable. So UNRWA can be replaced, but they don't want it to be replaced. Why not? Because UNRWA has an agenda. The World Food Program is to give food. UNRWA is to tell the Palestinians, your home is not here, your home is in Israel, and the right of return is October 7th. That is the point of UNRWA. UNRWA means war. If you support UNRWA, you support war. So what do we do? We can't replace them automatically, but we had a summit in Geneva. You can go on our website, unwatch.org. You will see humanitarian experts. Zlatko Zigic was a leading official of the IOM in Geneva, UN Agency of Migration. We had Bonnie Glick, number 2 of USAID. We had Jose Garçon, was UN Capital Development Fund. Ambassador Dennis Ross. Numerous humanitarian experts said UNRWA is replaceable. World Food Program, UNDP, many other institutions. UNRWA can and should be replaced. That is our message. Now finally, I want to wrap up and just say that we're living in very dark times. Certainly for me and for most of us, the darkest times that we've ever seen. And it's very depressing. What I've described to you is very depressing stuff. But in dark times, we are challenged and called upon to respond. In America, those who were attacked in Pearl Harbor and had to fight the Japanese and the Nazis were known as the greatest generation. And that is our challenge today. We're facing the greatest challenge that many of us have ever felt in our lives. And it is our challenge to become the greatest generation. And although we can be depressed, I see that UNRWA is cracking. The spokesman for UNRWA, Sami Mushasha, just wrote an op-ed in Ma'an Arab newspaper, and I'm going to read you a little bit about what he said. It was reported in Arab News Digest and numerous Arab newspapers. And he said that UNRWA is coming under attack. He said there's this group, UN Watch, this guy Hillel Neuer, he has a lot of negative energy. His first and main obsession is to attack and eliminate UNRWA. By the way, we never called to eliminate UNRWA before this year. We said, fire Nazi teachers. And they wouldn't. They attacked us. Now he's right. We do call to eliminate UNRWA because we woke up. He has great intelligence and energy and supervises an international coalition, yada, 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 okay? And then he says, we at UNRWA, when I was the spokesman, he says, we tried to fight back because they do conferences and studies and meetings. And he says, these institutions are responsible for the seriousness and ferocity of the attack on UNRWA and the right of return that we are witnessing now. Unfortunately, with great sadness, we do not have a center to respond like they do. What does he say? He says, he refers to us and another group. He says, these institutions have exhausted great efforts from a very small staff at UNRWA, with whom I had the honor of working, with the aim of exposing their methods and refuting their accusations and lies. So we had to try to refute all their accusations and lies. Over the years, we had some successes and unfortunately many failures. So the people within UNRWA, the establishment, are under attack. They are on the defensive. So we are not going to stop. We're going to keep pushing. That's why I'm going to be tomorrow in The Hague. And I thank StandWithUs for their amazing work that they're doing here in Netherlands. So necessary, and we're not going to give up. We have members of Congress, we have members of parliament in different countries. We're not going to give up on UNRWA. I see that the people in Israel, I was just in Israel now, they are resilient. You know, the greatest generation, you want to talk about the greatest generation? We thought 6 months ago, the Israelis today, they're the WhatsApp, the TikTok generation, they're spoiled, they're the, a startup nation. You see how Israelis from around the world, wherever they were, they did everything to fly on a plane and come to Israel and fight for their homeland to defend their families. And I have a cousin who was injured just a week or two ago in Gaza. He's an officer, and thankfully he was not seriously injured. He's okay, and he's going back. He's going back because they need him, because his commanding officer was killed, and he feels the need to command his soldiers, and he's going back. So I've witnessed amazing people, and anyone who's been to Israel recently saw how the Israeli people are responding to the challenge with incredible resilience. You know, Israel, as Micha Goodman wrote, had a near-death experience. You know, my grandfather apparently said that, told my mother, you don't understand what it's like. He grew up in Poland, moved to Canada. You don't understand what it's like not to have the Jewish state. He said, when we have the Jewish state, your back is straight. Before that, our back was different. So he lived in the 20s and 30s, 40s. He knew what it was not to have a Jewish state. Today, Micha Goodman writes, we understand what it could be like. We had a near-death experience. We almost lost the state of Israel. And on October 7th, the state wasn't there. Hamas was there. The state was not there. We almost felt like we lost the state. I was in Jerusalem. We didn't know if Iran was going to attack, Hezbollah was going to attack, Arabs within Jerusalem and Israel could attack. We had no idea. It was a very scary moment. We had a near-death experience. But now we understand and value what it means to have a Jewish state. And we're going to fight for it. People of Israel will fight for it, and Jews around the world who are facing anti-Semitism like we never faced before. But I've seen Jewish communities, and I know what happened here in the Netherlands, here in Amsterdam, have rallied together, and friends of the Jews who are non-Jews who've rallied to support us, to fight anti-Semitism, and we're seeing this incredible determination and spirit. And you know, we're coming up soon, we're in the month of Adar, we're coming up soon to Purim. And I think that the Jewish people, we are facing threats that we never faced before. And so it's so horrible, the challenges that we're facing, so dark. But we also have, the Jews are facing challenges, anti-Semitism in my hometown of Montreal. The mobs came to the Jewish community and were chanting horrible things and wouldn't let people leave a large gathering. The next day they went to a synagogue, and we're seeing it all around the world. Today you had it here in Amsterdam when they protested the opening of a Holocaust museum. So we have these horrible things, but Jewish history is deep, it is rich, and it is long. And even as we face these great challenges, our Jewish tradition reminds us that the promise of the Jewish people is eternal. And you know, in the story of Purim, Queen Esther initially, she hesitated. She hesitated before whether she was going to approach the king Ahasuerus and try to fight for the lives of the Jews. She hesitated. Mordechai said to her, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance, ki'im hacharesh tacharishi be'et hazot, revach v'hatzala ya'amod la Yehudim mimakom acher, v'at u'beit avich tovedu, u'mi yodea im la'et kazot higat lamalchut. If you keep silent, Mordechai said to Esther, in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish, and who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis. So the message of Mordecai was that Revach v'Hatzalah, relief and deliverance will come. And the question is, it will come. It will come. Will you speak out? And I think the message of Stand With Us, and the question for all of us is, relief and deliverance, we know for thousands of years of Jewish history, will come to the Jewish people. Even in their darkest time, relief and deliverance will come. And the question for each of us is, will we keep silent? Will we keep silent? And Esther's answer, she understood the message, she did not keep silent. And that is our message tonight. Relief and deliverance will come, Revach v'Hatzalah will come, and the question for each of us is, will we be silent? And remember, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. Thank you very much.
so much, Hillel, for your very informative and thorough talk about the UN and everything that's happening here. I'm sure people have a lot of questions, but seeing the time is getting late, we will get 3 questions from the public. We will have our volunteers walk around and keep your questions as short as possible so that Hillel can answer. They work? Okay. Yeah? You have? Okay. All right. Okay, let's start somewhere that side of the...
Hello, my name is Israel Explanation Europe. I have a question concerning the pressure on politicians. They suspended funding of UNRWA, but the opposition says what you say it's a lie, but they say like there is no alternative about UNRWA on humanitarian help. Now there are several options, but isn't it then better than to have one big option that everyone is promoting as alternative, and that to promote in different countries, like for example OCHA, who can take over, or what would you see, what is the best alternatives? Because if we say like, well, there are different alternatives and every parliament has to decide it by their own, then you have the problem like, okay, when one country said, oh, maybe the UN food program is better, another country said maybe OCHA is better, maybe another one says UNICEF is better. But what is then the best option, and what should we advocate together on this?
It's a good question. It's a technical question. How will aid be organized? At our summit in Geneva on replacing UNRWA, Zlatko Zigic from the former UN Migration Agency, former official, explained how actually in many cases there's a whole cluster of UN agencies, and OCHA manages a cluster. They show up somewhere, there are numerous agencies, and someone takes the lead and manages the various relief agencies. The truth is, it suffices, in my opinion, it suffices to make the point that we can help Palestinians, and obviously they are suffering now, and that's because of Hamas. Hamas caused this war. That we want to give maximum aid and humanitarian support to the Palestinians while giving minimal and zero financing of terrorism. And UNRWA, again, the very point of UNRWA is to perpetuate grievance, hatred, and war. So Israel will have to take the lead. There was a report hours ago that the IDF is going to try to remove UNRWA within Gaza. Israel will have to take the lead. They'll have to do so in concert with their American allies and their European allies. And it will be a technical thing that is not for us abroad to figure out the answer. I think it's sufficient for us to make the point that it is, as a matter of fact, it is just false to say that it's irreplaceable. It is replaceable, and that is clear. In fact, even Philippe Lazzarini of UNRWA said in an interview not so long ago, he said, actually, a couple of years ago, they tried to get partners who would do some of their work, like the World Food Program, and they tried to bring them, but the Palestinians said, we don't like that because it could weaken the mandate of UNRWA. Again, the World Food Program has no agenda. They give out food. UNRWA's agenda is to endorse the right of return, and the right of return means October 7th. So that is the obstacle here. Anyone who's making the point that there's a technical obstacle is lying. And that's the point that we established at our summit, and we're going to keep making. How to figure out who will do it, whoever's on the ground, assuming it's Israel now, can deal with the Americans like they're building a port, they can figure it out.
Hi, my name is Roy Turksma. I have a question. I come here as a student. What I've noticed in my university, the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam, and also other universities here in the Netherlands and also America, is that a lot of organizations such as Amnesty International, Students for Palestine, are really trying to make a win in university. And they're trying to spread things like BDS. And as a student, I'm worried, and I see this as well because I'm in the student council of the university. How can we prevent these movements and that BDS spreads throughout the universities?
Well, I'm glad that you're here tonight and that you're on the student council and that you're aware of these issues and looking for how to fight back. I don't have an easy answer. There's no magic solution. I'm at the United Nations fighting similar campaigns of extreme bias. And the best thing you can do is to fight back with the truth. Try to mobilize a coalition. I would like to believe that there are decent people. Of course, they're being fed misinformation in major media, which is terrible. We saw on October 17th, a news report went around the world saying Israel bombed a hospital and killed 500 people. The truth was Israel didn't bomb a hospital. It was the Islamic Jihad. 500 people weren't killed. It wasn't even the hospital that was bombed. It was the parking lot. Nothing was true. And it was front page of the New York Times. This, when I grew up, now it's different. When I grew up, the New York Times was like, this was the truth because they corroborate. On Twitter or Facebook, you could write whatever you want. You go to the New York Times, you go to Associated Press, you go to Reuters, because you count on them to have multiple sources and to verify. No news agency verified, none of them. They wanted that story. Hamas put out the story, and every news agency ran with it. So this is what we're up against. So it's a very uphill battle. You're going against Amnesty International, and I know them very well, founded as a great agency in 1961, and sadly today is siding with Hamas. And they've been doing it for a number of years. They side with Hamas. It's shameful. And you have to fight lies with truth. So, I invite you to use our website as a resource. We have a page called Rebuttals of Item 7, accusations that are made at the UN against Israel that are false. We refute them. Many of these are the same accusations that you will be seeing on campus. There's a group called NGO Monitor, which does great work in refuting the lies of Amnesty. And Amnesty is dangerous because they do undertake a lot of good work in other places around the world from time to time. And so they have the veneer of authority. People assume that they're like angels. And the truth is that on these issues, certainly, they side with Hamas. They're the opposite of angels. So there's no magic bullet, but I invite you to do your best to counter lies with truth. Try to reach out to any allies you see. If there's people who are haters, you're not going to convince them, but if there are decent people, you can reach a few people, other groups that are decent. For example, we have a coalition with Iranians. We work very closely with them, Muslims, other religions, Iranians who are facing the same enemy. We have alliances with the Chinese, the Russians, Cubans, human rights people who are facing dictatorships who side with Hamas. So it may seem, the average activist may seem that everyone's against you, but if you look a bit deeper on campus, you may find some people who say, wait a minute, I don't want to support the Iranian regime. They're terrorists. I don't want to support the Russian regime, the Chinese regime. So see if you can find allies. But I wish you strength because it's very hard to be alone in this battle. And if we can help you in some way, you'll let us know. You'll write to us. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Neuer. Thank you first of all for speaking. My name is Ethan. I'm a university student from Belgium, which is kind of like a better version of the Netherlands. I had to, sorry. Now besides that, quickly I wanted to ask you a bit more about what you do specifically at the UN, about your broader objective first of all, and of course if you believe there are steps that can be taken to make the UN more effective, in your opinion. Thank you very much.
We were created 31 years ago in Geneva by a great American named Morris Abram, certainly from the greatest generation. He was a member of the Nuremberg Tribunal as a young lawyer after World War II, and he became a lawyer in Atlanta, Georgia, and worked closely with Martin Luther King before it was popular. In the 60s it was popular, but in the 1950s it wasn't popular. And if you were a Jewish lawyer in Atlanta and you were working for the black guy, Martin Luther King, that was not popular. He lost a lot of business. So that was our founder, Morris Abram. He was one of the great civil rights leaders of the 1960s, was made US ambassador to the United Nations in Europe in 1989. In 1993, he had the vision to create an outside group that would watch the UN with a universal mandate to see that the UN lives up to the principles of its own charter. We're working to defend universal human rights. We're working with the most courageous defenders of democracy from the worst dictatorships. Every year we organize the annual Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy. You can see it at genevasummit.org. You will see testimonies by incredible people from China, Russia, Cuba, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Pakistan, Syria, Iran, North Korea, and we bring them to testify at the UN when many of their regimes are sitting on the Human Rights Council. By the way, on Monday, the UN will issue a report about violations in Iran. on the same day and in the same building in Geneva when the Iranian regime will assume the presidency of the UN Conference on Disarmament. Disarmament, right? The Iranian nuclear illegal weapons program to threaten the world, and they're going to be the chair next week of the UN Conference on Disarmament. So we're exposing universal human rights issues, and of course we're the leading voice fighting anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli bigotry at the UN. So that's our work, and the way we do our work is by bringing facts to light, using whatever platforms we have, social media. If you're not following us, please go to our website, unwatch.org, sign up so you can learn about important campaigns like the one we had last week where we got 100,000 signatures in 24 hours. And I brought that to the UN, I brought it to Paris, I'll be bringing it tomorrow to The Hague. And follow us on Twitter, my own account, Hillel Neuer, UN Watch, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and so forth. So that is our battle, and we're not going to give up.